Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time, not to some grand battlefield or a dusty royal court, but to the humble hearths and bustling bakeries of ancient Persia. Imagine, if you will, the flickering firelight illuminating sun-baked brick walls, the rhythmic slap of dough against a wooden board, and the warm, earthy scent of baking bread wafting through the cool desert air. You can almost feel the fine dust under your bare feet as you walk past the open-air ovens, can't you? Tonight, we're going to trace the very first whispers of what would eventually become one of the world's most beloved foods. Pizza. Yes, you heard that right. We're going way, way back to its ancient roots, long before anyone even dreamed of mozzarella or pepperoni. This isn't just about ancient history, it's about the very foundations of human ingenuity when it came to feeding ourselves. And let me tell you, if you're hoping for a thrilling tale of daring do and dramatic twists, well, you probably won't survive this 2-hour deep dive into flour and fire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're up for it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always cool to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported not by magic carpet, but by the sheer force of historical narrative to the dawn of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, specifically in the lands that would one day become ancient Persia. This isn't the Persia of grand palaces and glittering treasures just yet. This is a time when humans were still figuring out how to stop chasing their dinner and start growing it. You're walking through fields that, while perhaps not as neat and tidy as modern farms, are alive with the rustle of wild grasses. But these aren't just any grasses. They're the ancestors of the grains that would change everything. Wheat and barley. Think about it for a moment. For millennia, humanity was a nomadic species, constantly on the move, hunting and gathering whatever nature provided. It was a tough life, demanding constant vigilance and incredible physical endurance. Then, a slow, revolutionary idea began to take root. Quite literally. Somewhere, perhaps by accident, perhaps through careful observation, early humans realized that if they scattered certain seeds, those seeds would grow into more food. It seems simple to us now, right? But this was a monumental shift. It allowed people to settle down, to build villages, and to start thinking about things beyond their next meal. And what did they do with these miraculous grains? Well, at first, they probably chewed them raw, or boiled them into a kind of gruel. Not exactly gourmet, but effective. But a key moment, a truly pivotal invention, was just around the corner: grinding. Imagine the sound of stones rubbing against each other, slowly, painstakingly, breaking down those tough grain kernels into a fine powder. This wasn't just busy work, this was the birth of flour. Suddenly, those hard grains could be transformed into something far more digestible, something that could be mixed with water and cooked. This early bread wouldn't have been anything like the fluffy loaves you pick up from the bakery today. Forget sourdough or artisanal baguettes. We're talking about a dense, probably unleavened flatbread, cooked on hot stones or directly in the embers of a fire. It was practical, portable, and, crucially, it could be stored for longer periods than raw grains or cooked gruel. This was a game changer for early communities. It meant they didn't have to eat everything they harvested immediately. They could build up reserves, which in turn meant a greater sense of security and the ability to feed larger populations. Historians still argue whether the invention of bread was a singular eureka moment or a gradual evolution across different early farming communities. Was it a happy accident? Perhaps flour and water left too close to a fire? Or was it the result of deliberate experimentation driven by the need for more efficient food preparation? What we do know is that by the time you're standing in these ancient fields, the basic concept of turning grain into a cooked, edible form was well established. This early flatbread wasn't just food. It was a symbol of civilization, of humanity's growing mastery over its environment. It was the original fast food, the foundational carbohydrate, and the very first step on our long, delicious journey towards pizza. As you leave the wild grain fields behind, you're now stepping into the heart of Mesopotamia, a land cradled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is where those early, crude bread-making experiments truly began to flourish. Imagine the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and freshly baked bread. It's a scent that would have been as common then as car exhaust is now, though significantly more appealing. You see settlements growing, humble mud brick dwellings clustered together, and at the centre of many, a communal oven, its heat radiating outwards, drawing people together. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about culture. Bread wasn't just food, it was a fundamental part of daily life, almost sacred. The people of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon, names that probably sound like echoes from a very dusty textbook, were the master bakers of their time. They weren't just making one type of flatbread. Oh no, they were experimenting with different flours, different levels of hydration, and even rudimentary leavening agents. We're talking about an early form of sourdough, perhaps. Imagine leaving a mixture of flour and water out in the warm Mesopotamian air, and a day or two later discovering it's bubbling with wild yeasts. It would have seemed like magic, a gift from the gods, transforming simple paste into something lighter, more palatable. You might even see a baker, his hands dusted with flour, meticulously shaping dough. Some of these early loaves were round, others elongated, some even decorated with simple patterns. They weren't just throwing dough into a fire, they were developing techniques. Clay ovens, specifically tanneurs, a type of cylindrical oven still used in some parts of the world today, became widespread. Picture a tall, clay cylinder, heated from within, with dough slapped onto its inner walls. The bread would puff and bake, then peel away when cooked, leaving a perfectly crisp, slightly smoky exterior and a soft interior. It's a simple genius, really. This diversification of bread wasn't just for gastronomic pleasure. Different types of bread likely had different uses. Some for daily consumption, some for special occasions or religious rituals. Think of it like this. Just as we have bagels for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, and baguettes with dinner, these ancient societies had their own specialized breads. One popular Mesopotamian flatbread was a thin, unleavened bread called ninda, which was often eaten with stews or roasted meats. It was the perfect utensil, a tearable, edible plate that also soaked up all the delicious juices. Who needs forks when you have a piece of perfectly baked ninda? Historians still argue whether the proliferation of bread in Mesopotamia was primarily driven by caloric necessity or by a growing appreciation for its culinary versatility. Was it pure practicality, or did they just really enjoy playing with flour and fire? Probably a bit of both, knowing human nature. What's clear is that these early bakers were pioneers. They figured out how to cultivate grains, mill them into flour, mix them with water, ferment them, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, and bake them into a staple food that could sustain entire cities. And consider the sheer volume. With large populations living in urban centres like Uruk or Babylon, the demand for bread would have been enormous. Imagine the equivalent of modern-day factories, but instead of assembly lines, you have dozens of bakers working around the clock, kneading, shaping, and baking. It was a true industry, powered by human hands and rudimentary technology, but incredibly efficient for its time. This wasn't just a side hustle. Being a baker was a respected, vital profession. Their skills kept the cities fed, literally. Without them, Mesopotamian civilization as we know it might never have flourished. It's a testament to the power of a simple idea, turning grain into something edible and storable, that it could support the rise of complex societies. Having seen the Mesopotamian mastery of bread, you now drift eastward, entering the lands where ancient Persian culture began to truly define itself. Here, in what would become the vast and influential Achaemenid Empire, bread wasn't just a staple, it was woven into the very fabric of society, profoundly influenced by its dominant religion, Zoroastrianism. Imagine a world where every meal, every act of baking, held a deeper, spiritual significance. This wasn't just about putting food on the table, it was about cosmic order. Zoroastrianism, with its emphasis on the eternal conflict between Asher, truth, order, light, and Druj, falsehood, chaos, darkness, permeated every aspect of daily life, including the culinary arts. You see priests performing rituals, their voices chanting ancient Avestan verses, often with offerings of food laid out. And what was one of the most common offerings? You guessed it, bread. Specifically, a flat unleavened bread called dron was often used in religious ceremonies. Think of it as a sacred wafer, connecting the earthly realm with the divine. It symbolized purity and creation, an embodiment of the good bounty provided by Ahura Mazda, the supreme benevolent deity. This religious influence meant that the act of baking bread was not merely a utilitarian task, but a spiritual one. You might observe bakers meticulously preparing their dough, perhaps even offering a short prayer before lighting the oven. There was an emphasis on cleanliness and purity in food preparation, reflecting Zoroastrian principles. No one wanted to accidentally invite Druj into their dinner plans, right? So, hands would be washed, ingredients carefully chosen, and the baking process itself treated with a certain reverence. It wasn't just about avoiding a soggy bottom, it was about maintaining spiritual integrity. You might even see specific types of bread reserved for different festivals or ceremonies. For example, during Nowruz, the spring equinox festival that marks the Persian New Year and is still celebrated today, special breads would be baked. These weren't just delicious treats. They were symbols of renewal, prosperity, and the triumph of light over darkness. Imagine the aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with the scent of spring flowers, a truly sensory experience that transcended mere hunger. Historians still argue whether the detailed dietary laws and food preparation rituals in Zoroastrianism were developed primarily to ensure hygiene and public health, or if their origins were purely spiritual and symbolic. Was it a surprisingly advanced form of ancient food safety cloaked in religious dogma, or was it entirely about appeasing the deities? It's a fascinating chicken and egg question. What's clear is that these practices embedded a deep respect for food, particularly bread, into the Persian psyche. The religious significance also meant that techniques for preservation and preparation were refined. If your bread was meant for an offering, You certainly didn't want it going stale or mouldy too quickly. This likely spurred innovation in baking methods, ensuring consistency and quality. You'd also see communal ovens becoming important social hubs, not just for baking, but for sharing news and cementing community bonds, all under the benevolent gaze of Ahura Mazda, or so they believed. So, as you witness these ancient Persians kneading their dough, remember that they weren't just mixing flour and water, they were engaging in an act that was deeply connected to their worldview, their understanding of good and evil, and their place in the universe. Bread was sustenance for the body, yes, but also for the soul, a tangible link to their gods and their cultural identity. It was far more than just calories. It was a connection to the divine, a small, humble piece of a much larger cosmic tapestry. With the spiritual significance of bread firmly in your mind, you now witness the rise of an empire that would truly put ancient Persia on the map, the Achaemenid Empire. This wasn't just a kingdom, it was a colossus, stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to the Balkan Peninsula in the west. Imagine walking across such a vast territory where hundreds of different peoples, cultures, and languages coexisted, all under the watchful eye of the great king. This immense geographic span had a profound impact on everything, especially food and culinary exchange. You stand on a bustling trade route, perhaps part of the famous Royal Road, a marvel of ancient infrastructure that connected Susa, the capital, to Sardis in Lydia. Caravans loaded with goods from every corner of the empire passed by, spices from India, precious metals from Egypt, textiles from Mesopotamia. And amidst all this commerce, ideas were exchanged, including, crucially, culinary techniques and ingredients. Think of the sheer diversity. The Achaemenid Empire encompassed lands where grains like wheat and barley had been cultivated for millennia, alongside regions where olives and grapes flourished. This wasn't just about sharing recipes, it was about incorporating new foodstuffs into the Persian diet and adapting existing ones. Suddenly, Persian bakers weren't just working with locally sourced ingredients, they had access to a wider pantry. This expanded their possibilities for bread making, and, importantly, for what they put on their bread. Imagine a baker in a busy marketplace in Persepolis, the ceremonial capital. He's not just selling plain flatbreads, he's perhaps experimenting with sprinkling different herbs brought from distant lands, or maybe even incorporating early forms of cheese developed in various parts of the empire. This wasn't necessarily a pizza as we know it, with tomato sauce and melted cheese. Tomatoes were still millennia away from reaching the Old World, but it was certainly a step in that direction. Flatbread as a base for other delicious ingredients. This imperial reach also meant a standardization of some practices, even if loosely applied. As people moved across the empire, merchants, soldiers, administrators, they carried their foodways with them. A soldier stationed far from home would crave the familiar taste of his local bread, prompting bakers in new regions to adapt and learn. This spread of knowledge was incremental, often informal, but incredibly effective in disseminating culinary innovations. Historians still argue whether the Persian Empire's culinary influence was more about adopting new ingredients from conquered lands, or if it was more about exporting its own sophisticated cooking techniques to the regions it controlled. Was it a melting pot where everyone contributed equally, or was it a one-way street of Persian culinary dominance? It's likely a complex interplay of both, but undeniably this period saw an unprecedented cross-pollination of food ideas. The sheer scale of the empire also necessitated efficient food production. Feeding a massive army on campaign, or supplying sprawling capital cities, required organized agriculture and sophisticated baking operations. You might see granaries bursting with harvested grains, ready to be milled and transformed into the daily bread for millions. The logistical challenge was immense, and the ability of the Persians to meet it speaks volumes about their administrative prowess and their culinary ingenuity. So, as you observe the vibrant tapestry of the Achaemenid Empire, remember that its vastness wasn't just about political power or military might. It was also about the free flow of ideas, of goods, and most deliciously, of food. This period laid the groundwork for a truly diverse and innovative culinary landscape, one where the humble flatbread began its slow, inevitable transformation into something more, something that would eventually become a global icon. From the sprawling empire, your focus now narrows to a specific, ingenious invention that was central to the Persian bread-making revolution, the sangak oven. Imagine, if you will, stepping into a busy ancient Persian bakery. The air is thick with the scent of warm dough and wood smoke, but your eyes are drawn to something remarkable, a long, often pebble-lined oven. This isn't just a hole in the ground or a simple clay cylinder, it's a piece of culinary engineering designed specifically to create a unique and beloved flatbread. The sangak oven, the word sangak itself means pebble in Persian, is typically a long horizontal oven with a bed of hot pebbles or small stones. You see a baker, his movements practiced and fluid, taking a large thin sheet of dough often stretched into an elongated oval or rectangular shape and skillfully draping it directly onto these heated stones. The dough sizzles as it makes contact, and the direct heat from the stones quickly bakes it, imparting a distinctive texture and a slightly irregular, dimpled surface. Those dimples aren't just for show, they're little pockets of deliciousness, catching steam and giving the bread its characteristic chewiness. This method was revolutionary for several reasons. Firstly, the direct contact with the hot stones created an incredibly crisp crust, while the rapid cooking preserved the moisture within, resulting in a bread that was both crunchy and tender. Secondly, the pebbles prevented the dough from sticking and also contributed to the even distribution of heat, ensuring a perfectly baked flatbread every time. And finally, the unique shape and size of sangak made it ideal for tearing and sharing, perfect for a communal meal. It's essentially the original tear and share bread, centuries before anyone thought of a pull-apart loaf. Historians still argue whether the invention of the pebble-lined oven was a purely pragmatic solution to baking large quantities of thin bread, or if there was an aesthetic or textural preference that drove its development. Was it simply about efficiency, or did ancient Persians just really like a good dimple in their bread? Probably a bit of both, as often happens when innovation meets appetite. The sangak oven wasn't just found in grand cities. You'd see variations of it in rural villages, in military camps, and even in nomadic settlements, adapted to local materials and needs. It became ubiquitous across the Persian lands because it worked, and it produced a bread that was both satisfying and versatile. This wasn't a finicky oven requiring precise temperatures and complex controls. It was robust and reliable, perfect for feeding an empire. Imagine the daily rhythm of life centered around this oven. The crackle of the wood fire, the rising heat, the skill of the baker as he deftly maneuvers the dough onto the hot surface, then pulls off the perfectly golden, fragrant sangak with a long spatula or a pair of tongs. The process itself is almost meditative, a dance between human skill and the power of fire, and the taste, warm, slightly smoky, with a perfect balance of crispness and chew. It was the perfect vehicle for any number of accompanying dishes, from savoury stews to fresh herbs and cheeses. This invention wasn't just a fleeting trend. The Sangak oven remains in use in Iran today, a testament to its enduring design and the timeless appeal of the bread it produces. So, as you observe the ancient Persian baker at work, recognize that you're witnessing the genesis of a culinary legacy, a specific baking technology that would influence how flatbreads were made for centuries to come, laying crucial groundwork for what might eventually become something resembling a pizza base. With the ingenuity of the Sangak oven fresh in your mind, you now turn your attention to the product itself, flatbread. In ancient Persia, this wasn't just a food, it was the food. You can't walk through a market, visit a home, or observe a soldier's meal without seeing some form of flatbread. It was omnipresent, the undisputed champion of the ancient Persian dinner table, serving far more roles than just a simple side dish. Think of it as the ultimate multi-tool of the ancient diet. Flatbread was your plate, your spoon, your napkin, and your main course all rolled into one, quite literal, package. You see families gathered around a low table, tearing off pieces of warm flatbread to scoop up stews, wipe clean a bowl of lentils, or wrap around fresh herbs and cheese. It was the perfect vehicle for any food, transforming a simple meal into an interactive and communal experience. Forget the elaborate place settings of later eras. The flatbread was all you needed. This wasn't just true in Persia. As you scan the vastness of the ancient world, you'd notice variations of flatbreads popping up everywhere from Egypt to India, each region adapting the basic concept to its local grains and cooking methods. But in Persia, flatbread truly reigned supreme. The variety was astonishing, even if the core concept remained simple: dough, flattened, and cooked. You had the beloved sangak, with its pebbled surface, taftoon, a round, slightly thicker bread, often baked in a tandoor-like oven, and lavash, a very thin, soft bread, almost like a giant tortilla, perfect for wrapping. Each had its own character, its own ideal pairing, and its own place in the Persian culinary lexicon. It was like the ancient equivalent of deciding between a baguette, a ciabatta, or a sourdough loaf. Choices for every occasion. The practicality of flatbread was undeniable. It was easy to transport, especially when unleavened. Soldiers marching across vast distances could carry dried flatbread, rehydrating it with water or broth when needed. Merchants travelling the Silk Road would rely on it for sustenance during long journeys. It was less prone to spoilage than denser, yeasted loaves, making it ideal for storage in a pre-refrigeration world. And because it cooked quickly, it was efficient to produce in large quantities, ensuring that even vast armies or burgeoning cities could be fed. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of flatbread was due to its inherent practicality for nomadic and military lifestyles, or if it simply evolved as the most efficient way to bake bread, given the available technology, like hot stones or simple ovens. Was it form following function, or a happy accident of deliciousness? Perhaps both, as often happens in culinary evolution. Imagine the sounds of a bustling ancient market. Amidst the cries of vendors selling fruits, vegetables, and spices, you'd hear the rhythmic slapping of dough, the sizzle of bread on hot surfaces, and the cheerful chatter of people buying their daily supply of flatbread. It wasn't just sustenance. It was an integral part of the sensory landscape, a smell and a sight that would evoke comfort and familiarity for anyone living in ancient Persia. This ubiquitous presence of flatbread is crucial for understanding the genesis of pizza. Before you can have a pizza, you need a base, and the ancient Persians had perfected that base. They had developed various types of flatbreads, understood how to cook them efficiently, and, most importantly, they had integrated them so completely into their diet that the idea of eating something on a flatbread wasn't a novelty, but a natural extension of how they already ate. They were quite literally setting the table, or rather the bread, for future culinary innovations. With the foundational flatbread established as a central element of the ancient Persian diet, your journey now shifts to what made these flatbreads truly sing: the early toppings. Forget everything you know about modern pizza. There were no tomatoes, no melty mozzarella, no pepperoni. This was about making the most of what was available, and what was available in ancient Persia was a vibrant palette of herbs and spices, along with other simple fresh ingredients. Imagine a Persian cook, perhaps in a modest home kitchen or a bustling marketplace stall, taking a freshly baked, still warm piece of sangak. Instead of just eating it plain, they would instinctively reach for handfuls of fragrant herbs. You see mounds of fresh mint, parsley, cilantro, and basil not dried, dusty leaves, but vibrant green bunches, their aromas mingling in the air. These weren't just garnishes, they were integral to the flavour profile, adding freshness and a peppery bite to the earthy bread. It was like a very early, very rustic bruschetta, but with a Persian twist. And then there were the spices. While not as heavily spiced as some later cuisines, ancient Persia had access to a variety of aromatic additions. You might see a pinch of cumin, adding a warm, earthy note, or perhaps a sprinkle of sesame seeds, toasted to bring out their nutty flavour. Nigella seeds, with their slightly bitter, onion-like taste, were also popular, often pressed into the dough before baking. These weren't just about adding flavour. Some spices were also believed to have medicinal properties or were used for their aromatic qualities in religious rituals. This practice of adding fresh herbs and spices directly onto flatbread was utterly commonplace. It wasn't a special dish, it was how you elevated your daily bread. You might even see a small dish of olive oil or sesame oil for dipping, further enriching the experience. Picture someone drizzling a bit of golden oil over their herb-topped flatbread, the oil catching the light, enhancing the flavours and textures. It was simple, elegant, and incredibly satisfying. Historians still argue whether the practice of topping flatbreads with herbs and spices originated from a desire for enhanced flavour, or if it was initially a way to use up surplus fresh produce and preserve it on the bread. Was it a conscious culinary innovation, or just a practical way to avoid waste? It's likely a blend of both, as delicious practicality often drives culinary evolution. Beyond herbs and spices, other rudimentary toppings would have included things like chopped onions or scallions, providing a pungent freshness, or perhaps a scattering of dates or figs, offering a touch of sweetness. These weren't cooked onto the bread in an oven, but rather added after baking, preserving their fresh texture and vibrant flavours. It was all about contrast. The soft, warm bread against the crisp, cool herbs, the earthy grains against the bright, pungent spices. This habit of combining flatbread with fresh, aromatic additions is a crucial, evolutionary step toward pizza. It demonstrates a fundamental concept. The flatbread serves as a canvas. It's not merely food in itself, but a platform upon which other ingredients can be showcased and enjoyed. The ancient Persians understood this implicitly. They were creating edible assemblages, mini-meals on a convenient, portable base. While not yet bubbling with melted cheese, These simple, elegant combinations of bread, herbs, and oils were the very first ancestors of what would become a global culinary obsession. They were the original build-your-own flatbreads, long before anyone had heard of a food truck. Building upon the foundation of fragrant herbs and aromatic spices, your journey through ancient Persian culinary history now introduces another pivotal element that would eventually find its way onto the proto-pizza: dairy. Specifically early Persian cheese. You find yourself in a pastoral setting, perhaps in the cooler, mountainous regions of Persia, where livestock sheep and goats primarily graze on verdant pastures. The air carries the faint, earthy scent of animals and the slightly sour tang of fermenting milk. Long before refrigeration, ancient peoples had to be incredibly inventive about preserving food. Milk, being highly perishable, was a prime candidate for transformation. And transform it they did into butter, yogurt, and, crucially for our story, cheese. You might see a shepherdess or a farmer's wife, her hands stained with milk, carefully draining whey from curdled milk, perhaps pressing the curds into simple moulds or hanging them in cloth bags to further separate the solids from the liquids. This was the rudimentary process of cheese making, an ancient art perfected over millennia. Ancient Persian cheeses wouldn't have been the aged, sharp cheddar or creamy brie you're familiar with today. Instead, imagine fresh, soft, and often tangy cheeses. These were likely similar to modern-day feta, ricotta, or perhaps a crumbly cottage cheese. They were made from sheep's or goat's milk, which was more readily available than cow's milk in many parts of the region. The process was simple but effective. Milk was curdled, often with rennet, an enzyme from animal stomachs, or acidic agents like vinegar or lemon juice, and then the curds were separated and pressed. Sometimes they were salted for preservation or to enhance flavor. These early cheeses were a vital source of protein and fat in the ancient Persian diet. They could be eaten fresh or stored for longer periods, especially if salted and dried. And, significantly for our narrative, they were often consumed alongside, you guessed it, flatbread. Imagine the delightful combination: the earthy, slightly smoky taste of a freshly baked sangak, topped with fresh, aromatic herbs, and then crowned with generous crumbles of a tangy, soft cheese. It's a combination that still tantalizes taste buds today, a timeless culinary pairing. It really makes you wonder if they ever had a cheese pull contest back then. Probably not, but a man can dream. Historians still argue whether the invention of cheese was an independent discovery in multiple ancient cultures, or if it diffused from a single point of origin, perhaps in the Fertile Crescent. Was it a spontaneous discovery born of necessity, or a shared innovation that spread with early human migration? What's undeniable is its widespread presence in ancient Persia and its critical role in diversifying the diet. You might even see specific types of cheese that were particularly prized. For instance, some Persian texts refer to paneer, a general term for cheese, often referring to a fresh white cheese that is still popular today. This paneer could be served simply with bread and walnuts, or incorporated into more complex dishes. It was versatile, adaptable, and deliciously complements the simplicity of flatbread. The integration of dairy, particularly cheese, into the Persian diet further enriched the potential toppings for their ubiquitous flatbreads. It moved beyond just fresh herbs and oil, adding a new dimension of flavor and texture, the creamy, salty richness of cheese contrasting beautifully with the crisp and chewy bread. This development was a significant step on the long road to pizza. It showed a growing sophistication in combining ingredients, moving beyond mere sustenance to creating more nuanced and enjoyable culinary experiences. The ancient Persians weren't just surviving, they were starting to truly eat well, and their flatbreads were at the heart of it. Having explored the internal culinary developments of ancient Persia, your journey now expands to a truly global phenomenon, the Great Silk Road. This wasn't just one road, but a vast network of trade routes crisscrossing Eurasia, connecting the East with the West. Imagine yourself standing at a bustling caravanserai, a roadside inn for travellers, perhaps near the eastern reaches of the Persian Empire. The air hums with the cacophony of a dozen languages, the bleating of camels, and the clinking of goods being unloaded. Here, the exchange wasn't just about silks and spices, it was profoundly about ideas, technologies, and, most deliciously, food. The Silk Road, active for centuries, acted as a colossal conveyor belt for culinary innovation. From the fertile fields of China came new varieties of grains and perhaps even early forms of pasta. From India flowed an incredible array of spiced cinnamon, cloves, black pepper that would revolutionize flavors across the globe. From Central Asia came dried fruits and nuts. And from the West, various agricultural techniques and even early forms of processed foods made their way eastward. For ancient Persian bakers and cooks, the Silk Road was like having an endless global pantry open up right on their doorstep. Imagine a Persian chef already adept at using local herbs and cheeses on flatbreads, suddenly being introduced to the potent aroma of black pepper from India, or perhaps encountering a new, more robust strain of wheat from the eastern steppes, allowing for different bread textures. This constant influx of new ingredients meant endless possibilities for experimentation. It was like going from a limited grocery store to a giant international supermarket overnight. No wonder their cuisine flourished. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road's primary impact was the introduction of entirely new ingredients, or if it mostly served to increase the availability and lower the cost of existing, but previously rare, items. Was it about novelty, or about making luxury commonplace? It's likely a bit of both, demonstrating the dynamic interplay between supply and demand, and the ever-present human desire for new tastes. You might see a merchant unpacking a bundle of precious saffron threads, or perhaps a bag of exotic dried fruits. These weren't just sold as individual items, they influenced how people thought about combining flavors. A new spice might inspire a baker to create a flatbread with a slightly sweeter profile or a more savory one. The constant flow of people merchants, missionaries, soldiers, and even curious travelers meant that culinary knowledge wasn't confined to cookbooks, which didn't really exist in a widespread way anyway. It was passed on through observation, conversation, and most effectively through shared meals. Someone might describe a dish they tasted far away, prompting a local cook to try and recreate it with available ingredients, thus sparking new local variations. Consider the simple act of trade. A Persian merchant might trade his valuable lapis lazuli for a new type of dried fruit from China. He then shares this fruit with his family, who perhaps decide to bake it into their flatbread or serve it alongside their cheese-topped bread. This seemingly small interaction is how culinary traditions evolve, one bite at a time. The sheer volume of traffic on the Silk Road meant these interactions happened constantly, creating a dynamic and incredibly rich tapestry of food culture. It was like a very slow, very analog version of the internet, but instead of sharing cat videos, they were sharing recipes and ingredients. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for goods, it was a catalyst for culinary fusion. For our story of flatbread and its eventual transformation into pizza, this was critical. It broadened the palette of potential toppings and encouraged a mindset of culinary adventurousness. It showed that the base of flatbread was capable of carrying an incredible array of flavours, some local, some arriving from thousands of miles away, truly hinting at the global potential of a simple idea. From the bustling caravanserais of the Silk Road, you now gain exclusive access to a far more refined and experimental culinary environment, the royal kitchens of the Persian Empire. Imagine stepping past heavily guarded doors, the air suddenly thick with the rich aromas of roasting meats, exotic spices, and the constant hum of activity. These weren't just places where food was prepared, they were veritable laboratories of culinary innovation where wealth and power met the eager hands of master chefs. The Persian kings, especially during the Achaemenid era, were known for their lavish banquets and their demanding palates. Feeding a king, his court, and countless guests was no small feat. It required an army of cooks, bakers, and food preparers. These royal kitchens had access to the very best ingredients, not just local produce, but rare and expensive commodities brought in from every corner of the vast empire and beyond, thanks to the Silk Road. If you wanted a specific herb from India or a unique grain from Egypt, the royal kitchen budget was likely unlimited. It was like having a Michelin star chef with an unlimited credit card and a global network of suppliers. Here, surrounded by gleaming copper pots and skilled hands, you would have witnessed unparalleled culinary experimentation. While the common folk enjoyed their daily flatbreads with simple herbs and cheeses, the royal chefs were pushing the boundaries. They might have been incorporating more luxurious ingredients onto their flatbreads, perhaps finely chopped roasted meats, rare nuts, or even sweet fruit reductions. Think of early gourmet flatbreads designed to impress and delight the king and his guests. Imagine a chef carefully arranging slivers of perfectly cooked lamb onto a warm, thin lavash, perhaps drizzling it with a fragrant oil infused with exotic spices, and scattering a handful of precious saffron threads for colour and aroma. Or perhaps a sweet version, with crushed pistachios and honey, baked until slightly caramelized. These weren't everyday meals. These were culinary masterpieces, precursors to what we might call a sophisticated tart or a savoury pastry. Historians still argue whether the culinary innovations of the royal courts significantly trickled down to the general populace, or if they remained largely confined to the elite, serving more as a status symbol than a widespread influence. Was it a top-down culinary revolution, or did the common people mostly stick to their simple fare? It's likely that some basic concepts or ingredient pairings eventually found their way into popular cuisine, but the sheer extravagance probably remained exclusive. The royal kitchens also had the resources to develop and refine cooking techniques. They might have had specialized ovens for different types of bread, or complex methods for preparing ingredients. The constant pressure to create new and exciting dishes for the king's table would have fostered an environment of creativity and ingenuity. These chefs weren't just following recipes, they were writing them, creating new culinary traditions. They were the celebrity chefs of their day, though without the television shows and endorsement deals. The presence of diverse ingredients and the encouragement of experimentation in these royal settings provided a fertile ground for the evolution of flatbreads. It was in these elite kitchens that the concept of a topped flatbread, beyond simple fresh additions, could truly flourish. The flatbread base, perfected by common bakers, was elevated to new heights, becoming a vehicle for complex flavors and luxurious ingredients, moving it ever closer to the idea of a complete, composed dish that, while still far from a modern pizza, certainly shared its fundamental DNA, a delicious flat canvas awaiting its culinary masterpiece. Stepping away from the opulence of the royal kitchens, you now observe a far more utilitarian, yet equally significant, role for flatbread in ancient Persia. Its function as military rations and portable meals. Imagine yourself alongside a detachment of the immortals, the elite Persian fighting force, marching across a dusty, sun-baked plain. Their armor clinks, their discipline is absolute, but what keeps them going day after grueling day? A diet centered around versatile, portable food, and at the heart of it, flatbread. For a vast empire like Achaemenid Persia, fielding and sustaining massive armies was an enormous logistical challenge. Soldiers couldn't rely on foraging or elaborate field kitchens every day. They needed food that was lightweight, non-perishable, easy to carry, and quick to consume, even on the march. This is where flatbread became an indispensable military asset. It was the original MRE, meal, ready to eat, but a lot more appetizing, one would hope. You might see a soldier unrolling a piece of dried lavash from his pack, perhaps crumbling it into his water skin to soften it, or simply tearing off pieces to eat with a handful of dried fruit or a piece of cured meat. These were not the fresh, soft breads from the morning's bake. These were often hard tack-like flatbreads, baked thoroughly to remove moisture, making them resistant to mold and spoilage. They might have been a bit bland on their own, but when combined with other components of the soldier's rationer, bit of dried cheese, some onions, or salted fish, they formed a complete, albeit simple, meal. The very design of some Persian flatbreads, like lavash, made them ideal for military use. Their thinness meant they dried quickly and could be stacked compactly, taking up minimal space in a soldier's limited pack. When needed, they could be rehydrated or simply chewed, providing essential carbohydrates for energy. It was pragmatic, efficient, and absolutely crucial for maintaining the fighting strength of the army. Historians still argue whether the extreme practicality of flatbread for military purposes significantly influenced its widespread adoption by the civilian population, or if its general utility simply made it a natural fit for army provisions. Did the army make flatbread popular, or was it popular already and simply drafted into military service? It's likely a symbiotic relationship where military needs reinforced and perhaps even innovated on existing civilian practices. Imagine the simple ritual of a soldier at the end of a long day, sitting by a small fire warming a piece of flatbread. He might have a small pouch of dried herbs, or a piece of salty cheese that he tears off and places onto the bread. This wasn't about gourmet dining, it was about sustenance, comfort, and the familiar taste of home in a foreign land. It was a humble meal, but one that provided the necessary fuel for imperial expansion. This constant need for portable, durable food for military campaigns undoubtedly contributed to the refinement of flatbread baking and preservation techniques. The lessons learned in keeping an army fed would eventually trickle down, informing civilian food production and storage. The military, often a driver of technological advancement, inadvertently pushed forward culinary practices. So, as you observe the silent resolve of the Persian soldiers, remember that their strength wasn't just in their training or their weapons, but in the humble yet incredibly effective flatbread that fueled their conquests. This widespread, practical use case solidified flatbread's role as a fundamental food item, making it an even more natural candidate for future culinary innovation, eventually becoming the sturdy foundation upon which more elaborate and delicious creations, like our modern pizza, would be built. Having seen how flatbread fueled armies, you now step into the bustling economic heart of ancient Persia, its markets and distribution networks. Imagine the vibrant chaos of a large Persian city like Susa or Ecbatana. The air vibrates with the chatter of merchants, the calls of vendors, and the endless stream of people. Amidst this lively scene, one commodity is ever present. Its aroma, a constant, comforting backdrop: bread. The journey of bread, from grain in the field to the hands of a hungry consumer, was a sophisticated logistical operation for its time. You see sacks of grain arriving from surrounding farmlands, perhaps transported on the backs of donkeys or by river barges. This grain would then be taken to local mills, often powered by water or by animal traction, where it would be ground into flour. The rhythmic creak of the millstones would have been a familiar sound in the outskirts of any sizable settlement. From the mills, the flour would then be distributed to numerous bakeries. These weren't necessarily large, centralized factories, but rather a network of smaller, often family-run establishments, each with its own sangak oven or tanner. You might see a baker's apprentice, his arms laden with fresh dough, hurrying from the mixing area to the oven. The sheer scale of demand meant that these bakeries operated continuously, turning out hundreds, if not thousands, of flatbreads every single day. It was like a pre-industrial bakery assembly line, powered by sheer human effort and skill. Once baked, the bread wouldn't just sit there. In a world without widespread refrigeration, freshness was paramount, so the distribution was often immediate and direct. You'd see vendors setting up stalls right outside the bakeries, or perhaps carrying large baskets of warm, fragrant bread through the streets, calling out to passers-by. The most common form of takeaway was simply wrapping the bread in a clean cloth. It was the original grab-and-go food. Historians still argue whether the efficiency of ancient Persian bread distribution was primarily a result of centralized government planning to prevent famine, or if it was driven by the inherent free market demands of a large urban population. Was it state control or entrepreneurial spirit that kept the bread flowing? It was likely a combination of both, with local economies responding to daily needs within a broader framework of imperial oversight. Imagine the sheer volume. For a city like Persepolis, with its large population of residents, administrators, and visitors, thousands of loaves would be consumed daily. This necessitated a well-oiled machine, from the agricultural producers, to the millers, to the bakers, and finally to the vendors. This continuous cycle ensured that even the poorest citizen had access to this fundamental foodstuff. Bread wasn't a luxury, it was a right, a given. The ubiquity of bread also meant that it was often used as a form of payment or as a staple in workers' rations. Many labourers might have received part of their wages in bread, guaranteeing them basic sustenance. This underscored its fundamental economic importance. It was the currency of calories underpinning the daily life of the empire. This seamless, efficient system of bread production and distribution meant that the flatbread was always available, always fresh, and always central to the diet. This widespread availability was a key factor in its evolution. It wasn't a rare delicacy, it was the daily bread, ready to be paired with whatever fresh ingredients were at hand. This constant presence provided the perfect canvas for culinary experimentation, slowly but surely paving the way for the development of something more elaborate, something like a topped flatbread that hinted strongly at the pizza to come. Having observed the internal mastery and distribution of flatbread within Persia, your perspective now widens, allowing you to see how Persian flatbread traditions flowed outwards, influencing neighbouring cultures like Greece and Rome. Imagine trade ships docking in bustling Mediterranean ports, their holds filled with not just silks and spices, but also the culinary ideas carried by merchants and travellers. Or picture Persian soldiers, even in defeat, leaving behind their foodways in the lands they once occupied. The ancient Greeks, with their sophisticated culture, were keen observers and adopters of ideas from the East. While they had their own forms of flatbread, often called placus or massa, the interaction with Persian culinary practices, whether through direct trade or through the Persian Wars, undoubtedly introduced new variations and topping ideas. You might see a Greek baker, intrigued by a story from a merchant returning from the East, experimenting with sprinkling new herbs or early forms of cheese onto their own flatbreads. It was like seeing a popular new trend on social media and trying to recreate it in your own kitchen, but with clay ovens and no internet. For example, ancient Greek writers like Archestratus, a foodie of his time, mention flatbreads dressed with oil, herbs, and cheese. While not directly a Persian invention, the concept of elaborating on a simple bread base certainly resonated with and was possibly amplified by exposure to Persian habits. The Greek placus sometimes incorporated honey and nuts, moving it towards a dessert-like flatbread, but savoury versions with herbs and cheese were also common. Then there are the Romans. The Roman Empire, ever pragmatic and eager to adopt useful innovations, encountered Persian culture directly and indirectly. As their empire expanded eastward, they came into contact with various forms of flatbread and the accompanying culinary practices. Roman soldiers, much like their Persian counterparts, relied on portable rations, and flatbreads were a natural fit. Roman writers mention panis focaccius, a flatbread baked on the hearth, often topped with olive oil, herbs, and sometimes cheese. This focaccia, which eventually became its own beloved Italian bread, clearly shares a lineage with the flatbreads of the East. Historians still argue whether the culinary influence of Persia on Greece and Rome was a direct transmission of specific recipes, or if it was more of a general cultural diffusion, inspiring similar innovations independently. Was it a clear case of they copied us, or more a mutual evolution driven by shared ingredients and circumstances? It was likely a complex interplay where exposure to different ideas sparked local creativity and adaptation. You might even visualize a Roman legionnaire stationed near the eastern borders tasting a local herb and cheese topped flatbread from a Persian vendor and finding it remarkably similar to his own focaccius, perhaps even noting a subtle difference in the baking method or the specific herbs used. These seemingly minor cross-cultural encounters were the building blocks of culinary history. The continuous exchange of goods and ideas across the ancient world meant that culinary boundaries were fluid. The simple, versatile flatbread was a perfect medium for this exchange. It was easy to adapt, easy to bake, and universally appealing. The Persian tradition of enhancing flatbread with various toppings, born from their own rich agricultural and spiritual practices, gradually seeded similar ideas in the West. This wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, continuous process of cultural osmosis, laying essential groundwork for the eventual development of what we recognize today as pizza. The flatbread was traveling, spreading its delicious potential one bite at a time, preparing the taste buds of the ancient world for its glorious future. From the tangible exchange of food and culinary techniques, you now delve into a more abstract, yet equally fascinating, aspect of ancient civilization. How philosophers and thinkers pondered the significance of food, particularly bread, in daily life. Imagine yourself in a quiet corner of a bustling agora in Athens, or perhaps a serene stoa in ancient Rome, listening to scholars engage in spirited debate. While they weren't debating the merits of deep dish versus thin crust, their discussions about sustenance, health, and social order often revolved around this most fundamental of foods. For many ancient philosophers, bread wasn't just sustenance, it was a symbol of civilization itself. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle in Greece, and later Roman Stoics, often contrasted the civilized diet, rich in cultivated grains and processed foods like bread, with the barbaric diet of hunters and gatherers. To them, the ability to cultivate, harvest, mill, and bake bread was a hallmark of human progress, a sign of humanity's departure from a wild, untamed existence. It represented order, foresight, and community. It was far more than just carbs. It was a philosophical statement. You might hear a philosopher muse about the labour involved in bread making, seeing it as a microcosm of society. The farmer tilling the soil, the miller grinding the grain, the baker kneading the dough, each played a vital role, contributing to the greater good. This division of labour, necessary for producing a stable food supply, was a recurring theme in discussions about ideal societies and economic organisation. It was essentially the ancient world's version of a supply chain management seminar, but with more toga wearing. The concept of diet and health was also deeply intertwined with bread. Ancient physicians and philosophers, long before modern nutritional science, understood that what you ate affected your well-being. Different types of bread were often prescribed for various ailments or believed to have different effects on the body. A coarse, whole grain bread might be recommended for its cleansing properties, while a fine, white bread might be seen as more luxurious, but perhaps less wholesome. These discussions reflected a rudimentary understanding of fibre and refined carbohydrates, though they lacked the scientific rigour we have today. Historians still argue whether ancient philosophical and medical texts truly influenced widespread dietary practices, or if they primarily reflected existing traditions and prejudices. Did the philosophers dictate what people ate, or did they simply articulate what was already happening on the ground? It's likely a reciprocal relationship, with intellectual discourse both shaping and being shaped by daily life. Consider the symbolism of bread in ancient rituals and social gatherings. From offerings to the gods to breaking bread with guests as a sign of hospitality, it permeated social customs. Philosophers would observe and comment on these practices, often imbuing them with deeper meaning. The act of sharing bread became a metaphor for friendship, peace, and communal bonds. It was the original "let's break bread together" gesture, long before anyone thought of a business lunch. Even the availability and cost of bread were subjects of political and economic discourse. In Rome, the annona, the state-subsidized grain supply, was crucial for maintaining social order. Providing cheap or free bread to the populace was seen as a fundamental duty of the state, preventing unrest. Philosophers might debate the ethics of such policies, weighing the needs of the poor against the principles of individual liberty or economic efficiency. So, as you listen to these ancient minds grapple with profound questions, observe how often the humble loaf of bread features in their discussions. It wasn't just a physical object, it was a lens through which they understood society, health, and the very nature of human existence. This intellectualization of food, even bread, hints at a subtle but significant shift from merely eating to truly appreciating and understanding the role of what we consume. And that intellectual curiosity, however abstract, forms another subtle layer in the long, winding story leading us to the modern marvel of pizza. Leaving the philosophical debates behind, you now step back into the sun-drenched landscapes of the Fertile Crescent, the very cradle of agriculture and, by extension, the birthplace of bread. This region, stretching in an arc from the Persian Gulf through Mesopotamia to the Levant, holds an unparalleled culinary legacy that extends far beyond just bread. Imagine the ancient rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, carving paths through lush valleys, sustaining early human settlements that were experimenting with everything from farming to fermenting. This wasn't just a place where wheat and barley were first cultivated. It was a hotbed of agricultural and culinary innovation. You see early farmers not only growing grains, but also domesticating animals, cultivating legumes like lentils and chickpeas, and developing systems for irrigation. This incredible biodiversity and human ingenuity meant that the people of the Fertile Crescent had a remarkably varied diet for their time, far beyond just bread. They were, in essence, building the foundational pantry of the ancient world. Consider the diverse array of ingredients that first emerged or were widely cultivated here. Olives, grapes for wine, dates, pomegranates, figs, all these foods, which are still staples in Middle Eastern cuisine today, have their roots in this ancient land. Imagine a farmer carefully tending to his olive trees, or a date palm grove heavy with fruit. These weren't just food items, they were sources of fat, sugar, and essential nutrients, complementing the carbohydrates provided by bread. This agricultural richness directly fueled culinary creativity. With a wider variety of ingredients, people naturally started experimenting with how to combine them. You see cooks combining different grains, creating early forms of porridge or pilafs. They're using fresh herbs and wild greens and incorporating dairy products like yogurt and early cheeses, as we discussed. This wasn't just about putting food on the table, it was about creating complex and flavorful dishes. It was a true ancient food scene, though without the Instagram-worthy plating. Historians still argue whether the culinary advancements in the Fertile Crescent were primarily driven by environmental factors like the rich soil and ample water, or by the unique cultural and intellectual curiosity of its early inhabitants. Was it the land itself that spurred innovation, or the minds of the people who lived there? It was undoubtedly a powerful synergy of both, leading to an explosion of culinary ideas that rippled outwards. The impact of this legacy is truly profound. Many of the fundamental cooking techniques and ingredient pairings that we take for granted in global cuisine today can trace their lineage back to the Fertile Crescent. Think about it. The combination of bread, cheese, and herbs, the use of olive oil for flavor and fat, the importance of legumes and grains. These weren't just random pairings. They were the result of centuries of experimentation and refinement in this historically significant region. The Persian Empire, positioned strategically within this cradle of civilization, inherited and built upon this rich culinary heritage. They didn't start from scratch. They stood on the shoulders of millennia of Mesopotamian, Sumerian, and other regional food traditions. This deep-rooted history of diverse ingredients and sophisticated food preparation techniques meant that when the concept of the flatbread emerged, there was already a vast and delicious world of potential toppings waiting to be explored. The flatbread wasn't an isolated invention. It was part of a much larger, incredibly fertile culinary landscape, continuously shaping and being shaped by its surroundings. It was the perfect stage for a dish that would eventually, subtly, become the ancestor of pizza. Having appreciated the broad culinary tapestry of the Fertile Crescent, your gaze now sharpens, moving towards a bolder assertion that these ancient Persian flatbreads, adorned with their simple yet flavorful additions, were indeed precursors to the pizza. This isn't to say that someone in ancient Persepolis was shouting, "Pizza delivery!" But the fundamental elements were undeniably there, forming a direct ancestral link to the cheesy, saucy delight we know today. Imagine, one last time, that ancient Persian baker pulling a hot sangak from the oven. It's a large oblong flatbread still steaming. Now, instead of just tearing off a piece, envision him or her immediately drizzling it with a fragrant olive oil, perhaps brought in via the Silk Road, then sprinkling it generously with fresh, chopped herbs like mint and parsley from the garden, and finally crumbling a soft, tangy paneer cheese over the top. This isn't just bread with stuff on it. This is a deliberately composed dish where the flatbread serves as a dedicated base for other ingredients. The key conceptual leap here is viewing the flatbread not merely as a utensil or a side, but as the primary foundation for a composite meal. The ancient Persians understood this. They weren't just eating bread and herbs and cheese, they were eating bread with herbs and cheese, a single, unified culinary experience. This act of intentionally layering complementary ingredients onto a flatbread is the conceptual cornerstone of pizza. It's the moment the flatbread transcends its humble beginnings and begins its journey towards something greater, something akin to a culinary canvas. Historians still argue whether this practice of composing topped flatbreads was a conscious culinary innovation aimed at creating new dishes, or if it simply evolved organically from the practicality of eating existing ingredients together. Was it a deliberate step towards a new food form, or just a convenient way to combine daily staples? The answer likely lies in the gradual, iterative nature of culinary evolution, where small, practical adjustments eventually lead to profound changes. You might even visualize variations. Perhaps some flatbreads were adorned with slivers of salted fish, or even a sparse scattering of finely chopped cooked vegetables if available. While the toppings lacked the complexity and variety of later eras, the principle was the same: the flatbread as a platform. This was not a side dish, it was a coherent, edible unit designed for flavor and convenience. It was like a prototype vehicle, missing the engine and fancy gadgets, but clearly demonstrating the core design and purpose. The absence of tomatoes, which wouldn't arrive in Europe from the Americas for many centuries, and the distinct lack of a thick, melted layer of cheese might make it hard for our modern minds to fully connect the dots. But strip away those later additions, and you're left with the core concept: a baked dough base, topped with savoury ingredients, eaten as a self-contained unit. This fundamental structure, perfected in ancient Persia, forms the indisputable blueprint for pizza. So, as you see these ancient Persians enjoying their herb and cheese-topped flatbreads, understand that you are witnessing more than just a meal. You are observing the very moment, or rather the prolonged historical process, where the flatbread began its transformation from a mere staple into a sophisticated composite dish. It was a humble beginning, certainly, but every great culinary journey starts with a single, delicious bite, and in this case, that bite was decidedly Persian, laying down the flavours and the form that would echo down the centuries into every pizza parlour around the globe. Leaving the ancient Persian hearths behind, your journey now carries you westward, following the paths of empires to the burgeoning power of Rome. As the Roman Republic expanded, and later the mighty Roman Empire stretched its legions across the Mediterranean world, It inevitably encountered and absorbed countless cultural influences, including culinary ones. While Rome had its own native flatbreads, their interactions with regions to their east, particularly those influenced by Persian and Greek traditions, played a crucial role in the evolution of our story. You find yourself in a bustling Roman marketplace, perhaps in the port city of Ostia, or even within the sprawling confines of Rome itself. The air is thick with the smell of garum, fish sauce, the ancient world's favourite condiment, which frankly you probably don't want to smell too closely, roasting meats, and, yes, the ever-present scent of baking bread. The Romans, ever practical, were huge consumers of bread, and their own versions of flatbread were commonplace. They had focaccius, a half-baked bread often topped with olive oil and herbs, and libum, a cheesecake-like flatbread. However, as Roman legions campaigned in the east, or as Roman merchants plied the trade routes connecting to the Persian sphere, they would have inevitably encountered the more elaborate, topped flatbreads that had evolved in Persia and the Hellenistic kingdoms. Imagine a Roman soldier stationed in a newly acquired province in Asia Minor, sampling a local flatbread adorned with fragrant herbs, a drizzle of oil, and perhaps some local cheese or a few pieces of roasted meat. It would have been a familiar concept bread as a base, but perhaps with a more adventurous approach to toppings. It was like tasting a new fusion dish and thinking, hey, I could totally make this back home, but with more garum. The Romans were masters of adaptation. They weren't necessarily inventing entirely new foods, as much as they were refining and popularizing existing ones, incorporating them into their vast culinary landscape. The concept of a savory flatbread, perhaps brushed with oil and sprinkled with herbs, resonated deeply with their existing panis focaccius. The influence from the East simply provided new ideas for variations and additions. Historians still argue whether the Roman adoption of topped flatbreads was a direct result of encountering specific Persian or Greek culinary traditions, or if it was an independent, parallel development fueled by similar available ingredients and cooking methods. Was it a clear case of cultural borrowing or convergent culinary evolution? It was likely a blend, with external influences accelerating and shaping internal developments. You might even see references in Roman texts to various forms of placenta, a word that, while evoking images of biology today, referred to a flat cake or bread. Cato the Elder, in his work De Agricultura, describes a placenta recipe that involves layers of dough, honey, and cheese. While more of a sweet pastry, it demonstrates the Roman propensity for layering ingredients onto a flat dough base, a core principle of our pizza narrative. The Roman Empire's vastness meant that culinary ideas, once adopted, could spread rapidly across its territories. What started as a local custom in a far-flung province could quickly become popular in Rome itself, carried by soldiers, traders, and administrators. This widespread dissemination further solidified the concept of the topped flatbread as a viable and appealing food form, setting the stage for future developments. So, as you witness the pragmatic Romans incorporating Eastern culinary ideas, you're seeing another crucial step in the long, meandering journey of pizza. They took the established concept of a flatbread base from the Persians and Greeks and infused it with their own culinary preferences and imperial reach. While still lacking the tomato and mozzarella, the Roman focaccia and placenta were undeniably direct descendants of those ancient Persian creations, proving that a good idea, especially a delicious one, travels far and wide. As the Roman Empire eventually splintered and transformed, You now move into the era of the Byzantine Empire, a fascinating bridge between the ancient world and the medieval, and a crucial conduit for culinary exchange between East and West. Imagine Constantinople, the magnificent capital, a city where East truly met West, a melting pot of cultures, languages, and, most importantly for our story, foodways. The Byzantine Empire, essentially the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East, maintained close ties with both its Roman past and its Persian and Arab neighbours. Its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia made it an unparalleled hub for trade. You see ships laden with goods from the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, and the Silk Road, all converging on this glittering metropolis. This constant flow of commerce meant a constant flow of ingredients and culinary ideas, making Constantinople a culinary innovation centre for centuries. While the Byzantines inherited much from Roman cuisine, they were also heavily influenced by the rich culinary traditions of Persia and the Levant. You might see a Byzantine cook adapting a Persian flatbread recipe, perhaps incorporating new spices brought in by traders from the East. Their daily bread was often a form of flatbread, and the concept of adding toppings was well established. They might have used local cheeses, herbs, and perhaps even some early forms of cured meats or vegetables. It was like living in a city where every restaurant was constantly doing fusion cuisine, but without the ironically tiny portions. The Byzantine Empire played a critical role in preserving and transmitting knowledge, including culinary knowledge, during a period when much of Western Europe was experiencing a decline in literacy and cultural exchange. They kept alive many ancient Roman and Greek texts, but also embraced and incorporated Eastern ideas. This meant that the culinary traditions of topped flatbreads, which had evolved in Persia and been adopted by Rome, found a fertile ground in Byzantium, where they continued to develop and diversify. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine Empire's culinary distinctiveness arose more from its unique blend of Roman and Greek traditions, or if its strategic position at the nexus of trade routes made it a purely adoptive culture. Was it an innovator, or merely a sophisticated filter? It was likely both, skillfully weaving diverse influences into its own unique gastronomic tapestry. You might find references in Byzantine texts or archaeological digs to flatbreads consumed with various accompaniments. While precise recipes for Byzantine pizza are hard to pinpoint, the evidence suggests a continuity of the concept, a simple bread base serving as a foundation for a range of flavorful additions. The influence of Eastern ingredients, such as eggplant, spinach, and new spices, would have broadened the palette of potential toppings beyond what was common in earlier Roman times. The Byzantine Empire was a powerhouse of trade and cultural exchange, and this had a direct impact on its food. The constant interaction with different culinary worlds ensured that ideas about bread and its adornments were never static. They were continuously evolving, absorbing new flavors and techniques. This dynamic environment ensured that the ancient Persian concept of a topped flatbread wasn't lost to history, but instead was actively nurtured and refined, ready to be passed on to the next major culinary players in the story of pizza. It was the crucial bridge that ensured the delicious idea, born in the ancient East, safely made its way closer to the West and closer to its saucy, cheesy destiny. Moving beyond the Byzantine bridge, your journey now carries you into the vibrant and intellectually rich landscape of the medieval Arab world. Imagine thriving cities like Baghdad, Damascus, or Cairo during their golden age, centers of learning, science, and bustling commerce. The air is thick with the scent of spices, aromatic coffees, and the ever-present aroma of freshly baked bread. Here, the culinary legacy of ancient Persia and Byzantium wasn't just preserved, it was profoundly advanced, especially in the realm of baking and the use of toppings. The expansion of the Islamic caliphates in the 7th and 8th centuries brought vast territories under a single cultural and economic sphere, including much of the former Persian Empire and parts of the Byzantine realm. This created an unprecedented opportunity for cultural synthesis. Arab scholars translated and built upon Greek, Roman, and Persian texts, and Arab merchants established trade routes that far surpassed anything seen before, connecting East Asia to North Africa and even parts of Europe. This broad reach meant an explosion of new ingredients and culinary ideas. You see Arab bakers using sophisticated techniques. They perfected the tanner oven, making it even more efficient for baking a wide variety of flatbreads, from thin, crisp cubs to thicker, chewier versions. Imagine the rhythmic slap-slap of dough against the hot walls of the cylindrical oven, the bread puffing up and baking to perfection in mere minutes. This wasn't just about speed, it was about achieving a consistent, high-quality product. But it was the diversity and sophistication of toppings that truly set the medieval Arab world apart in our story. While ancient Persians used herbs and simple cheeses, the Arab world, with its vast network of trade and its penchant for culinary refinement, elevated the concept of something on bread to an art form. You might see a baker offering flatbreads topped with minced meats, often spiced lamb or beef, perhaps onions, various herbs, and a wider array of cheeses, some fermented, some fresh. They were essentially creating the world's first truly diverse range of savoury flatbread pizzas. Consider the dish known as manakish or manakish, still popular across the Middle East today. This flatbread is typically topped with a mixture of za'atar, a blend of thyme, sumac, and sesame seeds, and olive oil, or with cheese, or minced meat. This dish is a direct culinary descendant of the practices we are discussing, a living link to the inventive spirit of the medieval Arab world. It's like seeing the earliest version of an app that's still incredibly popular today. Historians still argue whether the culinary innovations of the medieval Arab world were primarily driven by new ingredients arriving via trade, or by an intrinsic cultural inclination towards elaborate and diverse cuisine. Was it the availability of new spices and produce, or a natural evolution of gastronomic sophistication? It was likely a synergistic relationship where abundant resources fueled an already keen culinary curiosity. You might also observe the use of yogurt and sour milk products, not just as a side, but as an ingredient on or in the bread itself, adding tang and moisture. The meticulous use of various nut oils and seeds for flavour and texture further enhanced these flatbreads. This was a cuisine that understood balance, contrast, and the power of aromatic ingredients. The scholarly and culinary texts from this era, like Kitab al-Tabik, the Book of Dishes, provide tantalizing glimpses into the rich gastronomic landscape. They detail recipes for various breads and accompanying dishes, hinting at the complexity and variety of what was being eaten on and with flatbreads. This was not just improvisation, it was codified culinary knowledge. So, as you witness the culinary brilliance of the medieval Arab world, you are seeing a critical stage in the evolution of pizza. They took the simple flatbread concept, expanded its repertoire of toppings, and refined the baking techniques to an unprecedented degree. They created truly diverse, richly flavoured, topped flatbreads that were undeniable direct ancestors of modern pizza, demonstrating how a good idea, nurtured by trade and intellectual curiosity can blossom into something truly remarkable. Leaving the vibrant, scholarly kitchens of the medieval Arab world, your journey now pivots to a period of intense historical upheaval and unexpected culinary exchange: the Crusades. Imagine the clash of cultures, not just on battlefields, but in the bustling markets and temporary camps where East met West in a dramatic and often violent encounter. Despite the conflict, or perhaps because of it, these interactions inadvertently facilitated the transfer of food knowledge to Europe, including, crucially, ideas about topped flatbreads. For centuries, Western Europe had been relatively isolated, its culinary traditions simpler, often driven by necessity. Meanwhile, the Eastern Mediterranean, with its long history of trade and cultural synthesis, encompassing Persian, Byzantine, and Arab influences, possessed a far more sophisticated and diverse cuisine. When Crusader armies, composed of knights, soldiers, and camp followers from various European kingdoms, arrived in the Holy Land, they encountered a world of food utterly new to them. You might see a weary crusader, after a long march, being offered a local flatbread by an Arab or Syrian vendor. This wouldn't be just plain bread, it would be a vibrant, flavorful creation, perhaps topped with za'atar, cheese, or even small pieces of spiced meat. For a European accustomed to heavy, dense loaves, this lighter, more versatile flatbread, especially with its rich toppings, would have been a revelation. It was like suddenly discovering gourmet street food after a lifetime of bland military rations. The Crusaders, despite their religious and military objectives, were also consumers. They needed to eat, and they ate what was available locally. This exposure led to a gradual, informal diffusion of culinary ideas. When they returned home, those who survived brought back not just exotic spices and silks, but also new tastes, ingredients, and food preparation methods, consciously or unconsciously. A knight might tell his cook about a delicious flatbread he tasted, prompting an attempt to recreate it with available European ingredients. Historians still argue whether the culinary impact of the Crusades was a direct and significant catalyst for innovation in European cuisine, or if it merely accelerated existing trends and familiarized Europeans with ingredients they might have eventually encountered anyway. Was it a culinary revolution, or just a spicy detour? It was likely a significant, though perhaps underestimated, factor in broadening Europe's gastronomic horizons. Consider the practicalities. The flatbreads common in the Levant were often quicker to bake and more portable than the heavier, hearth-baked breads prevalent in parts of Europe. This practicality would have been noted by soldiers and merchants alike. The idea of adding savoury toppings directly onto the bread, turning it into a complete meal, was also far more developed in the East. This was a direct, visual lesson in culinary efficiency and deliciousness. You might also think about the ingredients. While tomatoes and chili peppers were still centuries away, many of the herbs, spices, and cheeses used in the Eastern Mediterranean were known, if not always widely available, in Europe. The Crusaders' experience simply heightened demand and familiarity. The pizza concept, still in its raw form, was subtly, gradually making its way westward, carried by the very people who sought to conquer the land where it had flourished. It was a delicious irony, really. This period of intense cultural contact, however fraught with conflict, served as a crucial bridge. It wasn't about formal culinary schools or recipe exchanges. It was about sensory experience, about the taste of something new and delicious that stuck in the memory. The Crusades, therefore, played an unexpected but vital role in transporting the ancient Persian concept of a topped flatbread, refined by Arab and Byzantine influences, directly into the European consciousness, setting the stage for its next major evolution on Italian soil. From the crucible of the Crusades, your journey now brings you to a specific, vibrant island in the heart of the Mediterranean, Sicily. Imagine the sun-drenched coastlines, the scent of citrus groves, and the mingling of cultures that have washed over this island for millennia. Sicily, strategically located, became a pivotal point where the culinary traditions of the East, carried by Byzantines, Arabs, and eventually Crusaders, firmly took root, and began to evolve into something distinctly European, and crucially, something very much like our earliest European pizza. Sicily's history is a rich tapestry of conquests and occupations: Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Normans. Each left their indelible mark, particularly on the island's cuisine. By the medieval period, after centuries of Arab rule, from the 9th to 11th centuries, followed by the Norman conquest, Sicily was a melting pot. It had absorbed the advanced agricultural practices, sophisticated spices, and diverse culinary approaches of the Arab world, while simultaneously maintaining ties to Byzantine and mainland European traditions. You see Arab-influenced bakers in Sicilian towns, perhaps Palermo or Messina, still using some form of the cylindrical oven, turning out flatbreads. But these flatbreads were no longer just for scooping. Thanks to the long-standing tradition of topping flatbreads from the East, the Sicilians were already adept at adding a variety of local ingredients. Imagine a baker pulling a fresh flatbread from the oven and, while it's still hot, spreading it with local olive oil, sprinkling it with wild herbs like oregano and thyme that grew abundantly on the island, and perhaps adding a local hard sheep's cheese. This pizza-like dish in Sicily wasn't called pizza yet, of course. It might have been referred to simply as sfinzione, a spongy focaccia-like bread often topped with onions, herbs, and breadcrumbs, sometimes with cheese and anchovies. This is a direct, delicious descendant of the topped flatbreads that arrived from the East. It's the moment when the ancient Persian concept truly finds its first identifiable European home, becoming a regional specialty. It's like watching a band evolve from a garage rock group into something that finally gets airplay. Historians still argue whether the sfinzione and similar Sicilian topped flatbreads were a direct, conscious adaptation of Arab or Byzantine flatbreads, or if the island's unique blend of agriculture and existing Roman focaccia traditions simply led to a similar outcome. Was it a clear lineage, or a flavourful convergence? Given Sicily's intense history of cultural exchange, it's highly probable that influences from both directions played a significant role. You might also consider the availability of ingredients. Sicily had abundant durum wheat, perfect for flatbreads. It produced excellent olive oil, and its pastoral landscapes meant a ready supply of sheep's and goat's milk for cheese. Fish, especially anchovies, were also plentiful, offering a savoury, salty topping. These local resources, combined with the Eastern concept of topping a flatbread to create a truly unique and delicious culinary tradition. The pizza concept, as we understand its earliest European form, found its first real foothold here, on this culturally rich island. It was still far from the tomato and mozzarella powerhouse of Naples, but the fundamental architecture was there. A baked dough base, topped with savoury local ingredients, cooked and eaten as a cohesive dish. The groundwork laid by ancient Persian bakers, carried across empires and through conflicts, had finally landed in a place where it could flourish and adapt into something recognizably European, paving the way for its ultimate transformation. From the sun-drenched shores of Sicily, your journey now makes its pivotal leap to the vibrant, bustling streets of Naples. Imagine the sensory overload, the chaotic energy, the shouts of street vendors, the salty tang of the sea air, and the ever-present, tantalizing aroma of food. This isn't just another city. This is the birthplace of modern pizza as we know it, where two transformative ingredients finally met the established tradition of topped flatbreads. For centuries, Naples, a port city, had its own traditions of flatbreads, often sold by street vendors and consumed by the working class. These were likely simple, often topped with lard, garlic, or a few herbs. But the true revolution came with the widespread adoption of two newcomers, the tomato and mozzarella cheese. Let's talk about the tomato first. You see, the tomato, originally from the Americas, arrived in Europe in the 16th century. For a long time, it was viewed with suspicion, even fear, often thought to be poisonous due to its botanical relationship with deadly nightshade. It was primarily grown as an ornamental plant. Imagine a Neapolitan peasant looking at these strange red fruits, thinking, "Those look pretty, but I'm not eating that." It took centuries for people to realize their culinary potential, particularly among the poorer classes who were more willing to experiment with unusual foods. This eventually led to its widespread use in southern Italy, where it thrived in the sunny climate. And then there's mozzarella. While various cheeses existed across Italy, the specific, soft, fresh mozzarella made from water buffalo milk, or later cow's milk, became uniquely Neapolitan. It was stretchy, melty, and incredibly delicious when heated. Imagine a cheesemaker in Campania, the region surrounding Naples, expertly stretching and shaping the warm curds, creating that distinctive, milky, slightly elastic cheese. This wasn't a hard, aged cheese. It was designed for immediate consumption, especially when melted. The true magic happened when these two ingredients, the once feared tomato and the fresh, milky mozzarella met the established flatbread tradition. You might see a resourceful Neapolitan baker, perhaps trying to make a more appealing and flavorful version of the simple flatbreads he sold, experimenting by spreading a thin layer of crushed tomatoes over the dough before baking, and then adding slices of mozzarella. The result would have been transformative. The tangy sweetness of the cooked tomato sauce combined with the creamy melting richness of the mozzarella, all on a crisp yet chewy flatbread base. It was probably one of those eureka moments, though likely accompanied by the sound of bubbling cheese rather than a bathtub overflow. Historians still argue whether the margherita pizza was truly invented for Queen Margherita of Savoy in 1889, or if that story is a romanticized tale of a dish that had already been evolving among the common people of Naples for decades. Was it a royal invention or a popular food that gained royal recognition? It's probably a bit of both, with the legend solidifying its place in culinary lore. This combination wasn't just delicious, it was also colourful. The red of the tomato, the white of the mozzarella, and the green of fresh basil, often added after baking, serendipitously echoed the colours of the newly unified Italian flag, further cementing its iconic status. This was the moment. This was where the ancient Persian concept of a topped flatbread, refined by Arab and Byzantine influences and carried through Sicily, finally, spectacularly, became pizza. It was no longer just a bread with stuff on it. It was a distinct culinary creation, a harmony of flavours and textures, ready to conquer the world. From the humble, herb-strewn flatbread of ancient Persia, a global phenomenon was born in the bustling streets of Naples. From the bustling, tomato-scented streets of Naples, your journey now hurtles forward through time, witnessing pizza's ascent from a regional specialty to a global phenomenon, largely propelled by the Industrial Revolution and subsequent technological advancements. Imagine the world undergoing a radical transformation. Steam engines chugging, factories whirring, and vast populations migrating. This era of change wasn't just about machines, it was about moving people, products, and, crucially, food on an unprecedented scale. Initially, pizza remained largely a Neapolitan dish, a food of the common people. But, as the 19th and early 20th centuries unfolded, two major forces conspired to spread its cheesy goodness far beyond the Bay of Naples: mass migration and technological innovation. First, mass migration. You see millions of Italians, particularly from the impoverished South, boarding steamships, bound for new lives in the Americas, particularly the United States, Argentina, and Brazil. They carried with them their language, their culture, and their food traditions, and what was a simple, delicious, and adaptable food that could be easily recreated in a new land. Pizza, of course. Imagine an Italian immigrant in New York City, far from home, recreating a taste of Naples using readily available flour, tomatoes, and cheese. It was a comforting link to their heritage, a culinary anchor in a foreign land. These immigrant communities established their own bakeries and small pizzerias, initially serving their fellow countrymen, but soon the irresistible aroma and taste of pizza began to attract non-Italians. It was cheap, filling, and incredibly flavorful. It was like a secret menu item that everyone suddenly wanted to try. Then came the technological advancements. The Industrial Revolution brought improvements in flour milling, making flour cheaper and more consistent. The development of more efficient ovens, including gas and electric ovens, meant that pizzerias no longer needed large specialized wood-fired ovens, making pizza production easier and more scalable. Think of the sheer increase in efficiency. Suddenly, you could bake dozens of pizzas in the time it took to bake a handful before. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of pizza in America was primarily driven by its inherent deliciousness and affordability, or if it was more a story of clever marketing and adaptation by immigrant entrepreneurs. Was it simply too good to ignore, or did savvy business practices truly make it a mainstream success? It was likely a potent combination of both, leveraging taste, cost-effectiveness, and smart distribution. You might also consider the advent of refrigeration and better transportation infrastructure. This meant that ingredients like fresh mozzarella and high-quality tomatoes could be transported more reliably over longer distances. It allowed for the establishment of more pizzerias further away from major port cities, and eventually the rise of pizza chains. The invention of the pizza box, though much later, was another simple yet revolutionary innovation, making takeaway and delivery incredibly convenient. It's truly incredible how a simple cardboard container can change a food's destiny. This period saw pizza shed its humble, working-class Neapolitan origins and begin its transformation into a global commodity. It was adapted, modified, and reinterpreted to suit local tastes and available ingredients, but its core identity, a savory-topped flatbread baked in an oven, remained. The efficiency and scale enabled by the Industrial Revolution's ripple effects allowed pizza to become something more than just a regional dish. It became a culinary chameleon, ready to conquer plates in every corner of the world. From its humble Neapolitan origins and its propelled spread by industrial might, you now arrive at the present moment, observing pizza's astonishing status as a global phenomenon. Imagine walking through virtually any major city on Earth, from Tokyo to Toronto, from Berlin to Buenos Aires. The one constant, the familiar culinary beacon you're almost guaranteed to find, is a pizzeria. Pizza isn't just food. It's a cultural touchstone, a universal language spoken in dough, sauce, and cheese. Consider its incredible adaptability. Pizza has transcended its Italian roots, becoming a chameleon, effortlessly integrating into countless national cuisines while still retaining its core identity. In Japan, you might find pizzas topped with teriyaki chicken or squid. In India, tandoori chicken pizza is a staple. In Brazil, you'll encounter sweet pizzas adorned with chocolate and fruit. Here in Vietnam, perhaps you'd find one with local seafood or a hint of fish sauce, though historians still argue whether that is taking things a bit too far, even for global fusion. Each country, each region, has put its own unique spin on it, a testament to its incredible versatility. It's like a beloved song that gets countless covers, each with its own flavour, yet still recognisable. The rise of global fast food chains, beginning in the mid-20th century, played a colossal role in this worldwide dissemination. You see the ubiquitous logos of major pizza franchises, their standardized recipes and efficient delivery systems making pizza accessible, affordable, and consistently familiar in virtually every corner of the planet. This wasn't just about food, it was about convenience, about branding, and about creating a universal dining experience. The digital age has further amplified pizza's reach. You might see countless online delivery apps, their screens awash with images of bubbling, cheesy pies, ready to be delivered to your doorstep with just a few taps. Social media platforms are filled with user-generated content showcasing elaborate homemade pizzas or reviews of new pizzerias. This constant visual and digital presence keeps pizza at the forefront of global food culture, a perpetual trending topic in the culinary world. Historians still argue whether pizza's unparalleled global success is primarily due to its simplicity and deliciousness, or if it's more a product of clever marketing and the post-World War II American cultural export boom. Was it an organic triumph of taste, or a carefully orchestrated global conquest? It's undoubtedly a blend, with its inherent appeal being amplified by powerful economic and cultural forces. Think about the sheer economic impact. The global pizza industry is worth billions, supporting countless farmers, millers, cheese producers, restaurateurs, and delivery drivers. It's not just a dish, it's an entire ecosystem, a culinary giant that continues to grow and evolve. Its influence extends even to popular culture, with countless movies, television shows, and songs featuring or referencing pizza. It has become a symbol of casual comfort, of shared meals, and of effortless enjoyment. Who hasn't had a pizza night with friends or family? This global ubiquity is truly remarkable when you consider its humble origins. From a simple flatbread warmed on ancient Persian pebbles to a culinary icon found on every continent, pizza's journey is a testament to human innovation, cultural exchange, and the enduring power of a good idea. It has conquered palates and united diverse cultures, proving that sometimes the simplest ideas can have the most profound global impact, bringing joy one delicious slice at a time. Now, as our long, delicious journey through millennia of culinary history draws to a close, you reflect on the incredible, enduring legacy of Persian flatbread. Imagine, one final time, the ancient Persian baker, perhaps pulling a piece of sangak from a pebble-lined oven, its aroma filling the morning air. That simple act, performed thousands of years ago, set in motion a chain of events that culminated in one of the most beloved and ubiquitous foods on the planet, pizza. It's easy to dismiss those early flatbreads as mere historical footnotes, primitive ancestors of a more refined creation. But that would be missing the point entirely. The ancient Persians didn't invent pizza, no, not with tomatoes or mozzarella, but they provided the fundamental blueprint, the very DNA upon which all subsequent innovations would be built. They perfected the concept of a stable, versatile, and delicious flatbread base. Think about it. Without that perfected flatbread, would the concept of a topped bread have evolved in the same way? Highly unlikely. The Persian mastery of baking, the efficiency of their ovens, and their cultural integration of flatbread into every meal laid the absolute groundwork. They understood the canvas before anyone dreamed of the masterpiece. Their culinary ingenuity was the initial spark, a tiny ember that would eventually ignite a global culinary fire. Historians still argue whether the direct line of influence from ancient Persian flatbreads to modern pizza is as continuous and strong as we've explored, or if there were more independent parallel developments in different regions that converged. Was it a clear, delicious path, or more of a culinary labyrinth with many entrances and exits? While debates continue, the compelling evidence points to a strong, foundational contribution from the ancient Persian world. This legacy isn't just about the physical bread itself, it's about the idea of it. It's the idea that a simple baked dough can be transformed, adorned, and elevated into a complete meal. It's the concept of culinary versatility, of taking basic ingredients and combining them in new and exciting ways. That ethos, that spirit of innovation, truly began in those ancient Persian kitchens. They were the pioneers of the edible platform. As you look around today, perhaps here in Bac Ninh, Vietnam, or anywhere else across the globe, you see the direct descendants of that ancient Persian innovation. Every slice of pizza, every piece of naan, every slice of focaccia carries a whisper of that ancient legacy. It's a testament to the power of a good idea, nurtured through centuries, across empires, and through countless cultural exchanges. It reminds us that culinary history is a continuous, interconnected story, where every humble beginning can lead to a truly global phenomenon. So, the next time you bite into a piece of pizza, just take a moment to appreciate the thousands of years of history, the countless hands, and the ingenious minds that contributed to its creation. It's not just food, it's a journey, a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring desire to create something delicious. Now, as the flavors of ancient Persia and the aromas of fresh pizza begin to fade, let your mind drift. The long journey through history, from humble grains to global phenomenon, has been a winding one, full of surprising turns and unexpected connections. You can almost feel the gentle warmth of the ancient ovens, the soft whisper of the wind through ancient fields, and the quiet contentment of a meal shared across millennia. The story of bread, and its ultimate evolution into pizza, is a testament to human creativity, adaptability, and the universal joy of good food. Let these thoughts softly settle, like the last embers of a dying fire, as your breathing slows. The day is done, the history recounted. Allow yourself to gently sink into comfort, letting the echoes of ancient flavors guide you towards a peaceful rest.